Hey everyone, God bless you. Thanks for tuning in. My reflection today I've entitled When Harry Becomes Sally. Let me explain that to you in a minute. But first, let me wish you a happy feast of the finding of the head of St. John the Baptist, that precious relic that we say in the services for him today was like mining precious gold out of the earth when we got his head out of the earth. I also wish you a fruitful week after the Sunday of the Publican and the Pharisee. In our Orthodox tradition, this week is a pre-Lenten week. We are reminded by the Sunday of the Publican and the Pharisee that our spiritual efforts have to be built upon a foundation of humility. We have to be like the publican who repented deeply and felt deeply about his sins. This is the path to justification and transformation, a transformative repentance. It's also a week in which we don't fast, either on Wednesday or Friday, which is quite unusual. We don't fast because we are remembering that the fasting of the Pharisee was worthless. In fact, it was even repulsive to God because it was a fasting that was built upon pride and self-righteousness, whereas our fasting has to be an expression of sincere desire for God, a desire to tame and regulate the desires and passions, and to grow spiritually. So there you have it. A good week to all of you. I am reflecting today on an incredible book. It's written by a young scholar who I'll tell you about soon, named Ryan T. Anderson. And the book is entitled When Harry Becomes Sally. And I have thought about sharing some reflections on this text with you because of a controversy that erupted this week when just several days ago Amazon removed this incredible text from its store, basically banning this text. Why would they do that? And what is it about this text? Well, let me tell you a little bit about it because it's extremely important. And the subject that Dr. Anderson is addressing is something that is before us, even as we speak nationally. When Harry Becomes Sally is a takeoff. The title is a takeoff on a popular movie back in the 80s, I think 1989, when Harry met Sally, which was a big hit back then. And it was basically addressing the issue of whether a man and a woman could just be friends. The conclusion of the movie was, who knows? Who knows? But it was followed later in 2015 by a movie that Hollywood produced called The Danish Girl, which is the story of a man in 1930 who was the first known individual to go through sex reassignment surgery. And the message from Hollywood this time was, this is right, and you better be on the supportive side of transgenderism and sex reassignment surgery. That's the title of the book. It's subtitled Responding to the Transgender Moment. Responding to the Transgendered Moment. I want to point out that subtitle because responding is exactly what we have not done. And it is desperately needed. It seems like yesterday, just a year or two ago, when the thought of children having sex reassignment surgery as a response to gender dysphoria was unthinkable by most people and by most medical practitioners. Whereas today, in just literally the blink of an eye, with almost no philosophical foundation or social dialogue, this has become normative. The transgender movement has been embraced by the LGBT community, and a person like Ryan Anderson, of whom I'll speak in just a moment, is banned from Amazon. What is going on? Responding is definitely something that needs to be done. Not only have there been very few secular critiques and questioning, unlike the incredible secular response to the digital age and to critiques on social media and the smartphones, etc. That area has really been flooded with very competent, not just religious critiques, but secular critiques of the information age. Not much has been produced yet, not much commentary on transgender ideology. I think this is one reason is that it's so new, but it has been embraced by the elites of our culture and by our influential politicians almost without any explanation, just as though it's obvious. And I also think it's associated with so much cultural intolerance that very few people want to write about it, because in this so-called cancel culture, if you dare to think out loud about important subjects that are considered taboo by the powerful forces, then you could pay dearly, and there aren't that many who want to pay. You would think, of course, that none of those things would matter in the Church of Christ, but there has been very, very little coming by way of theological critique, philosophical critique, pastoral critique. There's some, a little bit, but not much. Most pastors are completely left in the wind, which is not good, because the winds of cultural degradation are blowing at high speeds, and we need a solid theological response. This video is not to provide that, but I can tell you this. I know Ryan Anderson, and I read this book when it came off the presses in 2018. There is no better place to start than reading When Harry Became Sally. It was banned, no doubt, for a reason by Amazon, because, in my opinion, it is an exceedingly competent work, very sympathetic, very reasonable, completely devoid of provocative language. It is a solid academic piece. Perhaps that's the very reason that it was removed, is that it cannot be answered. I'd love to read some efforts at responding to Ryan Anderson. Let me tell you a little bit about Ryan Anderson. He's a young intellectual. He actually graduated from Princeton with a BA in music. He went to Notre Dame, then he got a PhD in political philosophy. I first came across Ryan Anderson in 2012 when I attended a meeting of some pastors and scholars in Manhattan that was arranged by Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York, as well as the deeply respected Princetonian professor of law, Robert George. And Robert George is a mentor and an academic pedagogue that of really incredible proportions, a Roman Catholic believer, and he taught Ryan Anderson and has mentored Ryan Anderson. And in fact, 2012 was a year that Ryan, together with another young scholar, Sharif Girgis, together with Robert George, published a text, What is Marriage, Man and Woman? A Defense. And I knew from reading that book and from interacting with Ryan on at that occasion and another, that he was a very rational and well-accomplished, thoughtful scholar. He went on to become I think the founder and editor of the online journal for the Witherspoon Institute. He became a senior fellow, I think, at the Heritage Foundation, and currently is the president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, a think tank that tries to apply Christian morality to public policy, which is in D.C. He's not to be trifled with. He's very serious business, and he's also a very common, reasonable person who welcomes dialogue. He's interacted and both on an academic level and in a popular level with persons who oppose his positions on things, and is very civil in his discourse, of course, which makes the removal of his book even more grievous. If you can, let me tell you a little bit why I think you should get this book and why it's a fantastic primer for a subject that we all need to, whether we want to or not, especially pastors, teachers. We need to become informed on the transgender movement. We really do. And so let me just summarize the basic content of this book and then end with an encouragement to you. This book comes in 8 chapters. I'll tell you the title of each chapter and a little bit about what each chapter is about now. The first chapter is called Our Transgender Moment, and it's a summary of the rise of the very, very recent rise of the transgender movement, how the word sex has been redefined in this movement to mean gender in culture, law, and medicine. This really began in a very serious way during the Obama administration, and is coming to a climax now, in fact, with the full endorsement of recently elected President Biden, who has made it very clear that he wants the so-called Equality Act, which is being presented to Congress literally as I speak, which would codify this kind of radical transgender ideology into American law, seriously threatening religious liberty and Christian belief in many areas. It's an extremely concerning law. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2 is called What the Activists Say. And here Dr. Anderson reveals in their own language the heart of trans ideology, that the affirmation, that the idea that a trans boy is a boy, even if he's a biological girl, that is obvious and cannot be questioned. And if you do question it, the primacy of biology, you are by definition a bigot. He also in this chapter on What the Activists says explains the new agenda for trans medicine, which is to support a 4-pronged process of so-called transitioning. This is a process that starts with social transitioning, moves to puberty blockers, goes to the administration of cross-sex hormones, and ends up in sex reassignment, quote unquote, surgery. Chapter 3 is called Detransitioners Tell Their Stories. And this is a very valuable chapter in which Dr. Anderson allows the victims of this ideology, many of whom have suffered terrible persecution because they've gone through the process and are now talking about it and its very unfortunate consequences in their life. These persons aren't supposed to exist, and they're suffering terrible persecution from the transgender movement. Chapter 4 is a very valuable chapter on basic philosophy and science of sex, entitled What Makes Us a Man or a Woman? And in this chapter, Dr. Anderson explains the value and the meaning of biological sex, that it's not something that is assigned. No doctor can assign sex except by writing on a little piece of paper, but persons are not assigned sex. They're created by God, male or female. And that identity, that reality of being male and female, in fact, permeates every aspect of life, down, in fact, to every individual cell. There are male brains, there are female brains, and every other aspect of human life. This is chapter 4. Chapter 5, Transgender Identity and Sex Reassignment. This documents that very, very little is known today about the cause of gender dysphoria. It is being studied aggressively, but there has been no scientific consensus about it, which should therefore cause us to have some reserve about trying to solve scientifically a problem that we can't even define properly or find with regards to origination. It also, in this chapter, he also shows the most helpful therapies with a goal to conform thoughts to the body and not body to changing thoughts. Chapter 6 is entitled Childhood Dysphoria and Desistance, and this is simply documenting many, many case studies about the consequences of sex reassignment surgery. Chapter 7 is entitled Gender and Culture, and he explains that this cultural gender confusion is very much rooted in the aggressive gender ideology and theory, which is being promoted at the earliest ages. So teachers and ideologues are telling people who have dysphoria how to respond to that and how to think about it. We are actually radically encouraging the process and causing the percentage of dysphoria to greatly grow. He also talks a little bit in that chapter about the principle in transgender ideology of unisex insanity, that there are the affirmation that there really are no essential differences between male and female. And then the last chapter is chapter 8, policy and the common interest. And here he simply justifies the investment that he's made in his life and in his writing as a scholar on this subject, because it has such a permeating influence in society. And he addresses the issue of the access to single-sex facilities, pronoun policing, healthcare mandates, religious liberty threats, the issue of trans persons in trans women in female sports, and more. What's my suggestion to you, dear ones? My suggestion to you is a couple things. One is buy a copy. Respond to Amazon's very poor decision to remove this book from its store by going to Barnes & Noble or some other on-site book distributor and buy yourself a copy and read it and educate yourself about this. Say no. Say no to the thought police, and tell Big Brother to go back to the hell from which he came. That's my suggestion to you all. And I wish you a very wonderful day. God be with you.
Patristic Nectar Publications is pleased to present a new 5-lecture series entitled Contemporary Women Saints. St. John of Sinai, in his Ladder of Divine Ascent, writes that the lives of the saints arouse us to emulation of their courage and lead us to the virtue of humility and compunction. Contemporary saints are particularly important since they acquired their love for God and holiness in the midst of our current milieu and demonstrate that spiritual acquisition is possible even in our own troubled times.
For these and other available titles, please visit our website at patristicnectar.org.